Thank you again. And yes, Nnimmo, you're currently on mute.
Thank you so much. I hope you can hear me. Thanks a lot for having us in this conversation. I will do a poem I wrote in 1998 in response to oppressive response of the security of the government in Nigeria to a simple climate action. It is titled, We Thought It Was Oil, but It Was Blood. Usually when I read it, there's a beat to go with it, but you can do without a beat, but I would be happy if you can respond, but it was blood. When I say we thought it was oil. When I say we thought it was oil, please, if you don't mind, just respond by saying, that means you're going to unmute yourself and say, but it was blood. Thank you. The other day, we danced in the streets, joy in our hearts. We thought we were free. 3 young folks fell to our right. Countless more fell to our left. Looking up, far from the crowd, we beheld red-hot guns. We thought it was oil, but it was blood. We thought it was oil, but it was blood. Blood jumping into our mouths, floating on emotions' dry wells. We leapt in fury, knowing it wasn't funny. Then we beheld bright red pools. We thought it was oil, but it was blood. It was blood. We thought it was oil, but it was blood. Tears don't flow when you're scarred. First it was the Ogoni, today the Jaws. Who will be slain? This next day, we see open mouths, we hear no screams. Standing in a pool, up to our knees. We thought it was oil, but it was blood. Thought it was oil, but it was blood. Dry tear bags, polluted streams. Things are real when found in dreams. We see their shells behind military shields. Evil, horrible, gallows called ricks, drilling our souls. We thought it was oil, but it was blood. We thought it was oil, but it was blood. Heavens are open above our heads. Toasted dreams in a flat sky, scrambled sky, a million black holes in a burnt up sky. Their pipes may burst, but our dreams won't burst. We thought it was oil, but it was blood. We thought it was oil, but it was blood. This we tell you, they may kill all, but the blood will speak. They may gain all, but the soil will rise. We may die, but stay alive. Placed on the slab, slaughtered by the day, we are the living, long sacrificed. We thought it was oil, but it was blood. Thought it was oil, but it was blood. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Nnimmo. Yeah, I'm like, I think we're all absorbing the power of your words and just what it means, the both current reality and the decades of struggle that those words are describing. With that, we can all take a deep breath. And yeah, I'm going to invite Nnimmo and also Gopal, if we could all be, there we go. Going to have a pretend like we're sitting together, you know, around some chairs or a table, comfortable space. And I was just reflecting in preparing for this conversation about how I met both of you and what an amazing impact you've made for me, and I know for everyone at Grassroots who's had a chance to connect with you. So we're really glad to expand that. Nnimmo, I remember going to the People's World Conference on Climate Change and Mother Earth Rights in Cochabamba, Bolivia in 2010. And for those who aren't familiar with this, this was a conference that was put together as an alternative to the UN climate negotiations, because it was very clear even at that point that the climate negotiations that were being organized were not serving the people's needs, not getting to the root causes of what is really causing climate disruption, and not going to come out with the right solution. So the idea was, let's bring all the peoples of the world who are involved in these struggles directly, the forefront, to analyze what the root causes are and what the real solutions are through this collective consensus process. That was 30,000 people engaged in a consensus process over about a week. And I remember, Nnimmo, you're being there, and I was looking for, I'd come out of doing grassroots organizing in Providence, and I was looking for examples from the global South and internationally. And specifically, like for me, I really wanted to find more folks from the African continent, since that's where I was from. And I met you and was like, wow, okay, this is like feeding my soul and giving me a lot of hope and inspiration, because you were able to describe with so much clarity why the climate crisis was happening in this way, and being connected to, oh, we just lost him. It might be a connection issue. Hopefully he'll come back. But yeah, just like having that clarity on what needed to happen to come through. And then Gopal, meeting you also, as I think I'd shared with some people, I was like, had done a lot of grassroots organizing locally, but didn't have a lot of experience around climate justice, ecological justice. And folks kept telling me, oh, you should call Movement Generation Justice and Ecology Project. So soon after I did, getting to connect with you and meet you. Oh, beautiful. So glad you could come back, Nnimmo. We know that connection issues can be a problem sometimes. Yes. So I started talking about Gopal, but was, I think, before, when you got cut off, just, reflecting back on meeting you and what that meant. And yeah, just like so appreciating the vision and clarity that you brought with you to not just that space in Cochabamba, but also learning from you in a continued way. Folks haven't read To Cook a Continent yet. I would definitely recommend it. It's an amazing book that I think just lays really bare, like what's happening and what are the root causes and who's behind it. And yeah, and Gopal, getting to meet you through Movement Generation as well. And you're breaking down. I think Trina, you and I were in that same training together, where Gopal and others were breaking down, how eco means home, and what it really take for us to confront the realities of this situation through translocal organizing. And yeah, so just like thinking about, that opportunity to have learned from you all those years ago and what the relationships have meant. Wanted to ask if you could talk a little bit, each of you, about also how you first, maybe not first, but how you've been connecting with and working with each other, just as a way for folks to get a sense that these are relationships that are long-term and powerful. And yeah, you want to start?
Do you want to go? I'll go first. So first, I just want to really just appreciate the opportunity to be here. I am just a big fan of Grassroots International. I am coming for the party. So I will be coming your way for the party. And it is an unbelievable gift to be able to do this with Nnimmo. So we go back, I think 1999 or early 2000 is when I had been with an organization called Project Underground, supporting communities resisting human rights abuses by the oil and mining industry. And it is through that work that I got connected to Nnimmo at Environmental Rights Action Nigeria. Stayed in your home, went to your sermon, traveled through the Delta with you, and in support of communities. And then we have just continued to be in relationship and connection through so many different ways. And I am always learning so much from you. And it's such a blessing to be in relationship with you. We served on the board of the EPC group together until I had to step down from the board in order to join the staff. Again, just being able to come to the School of Ecology, that's like my fantasy, is to come back to another School of Ecology from Health of Mother Earth Foundation, and just really decades of comradeship and organizing together at COP15 in Copenhagen, that incredibly disturbing and pivot point in some ways for the climate movement globally. So just many different connections over lots of different time. But I think the most important thing here for me, and I think the thing that I want to say that's just going to frame everything I say, is for me, everything is only and ever and always about relationships. And centering relationship in every way that we think and act and are in the world, and looking at relationships as the way to understand the transformation we need. And so it is just, again, a blessing to continue to be in this relationship with you, Nnimmo, and Sara, and everyone at Grassroots International. And that's the strength of our movement, is that we are trying to live into a different kind of relationship with each other, or remember our way forward, the relationships that we hold sacred.
Thank you so much, Gopal. And you know that clearly the way to build a livable future is to keep on building relationships, constructing our relationships, repairing broken relationships, not just with each other, but also with other beings, some on 4 legs, some on 6 legs, some with wings that fly, and others who are stationary. It's been amazing. And each time we've collaborated or done some work together, it's been a defining moment for us. In the early 90s, when you came around in the Project Underground, it helped me to refine my focus with regard to the struggle against the fossil fuel industry. And I've stayed on that path since then, not shifting one moment at all, because the problems have refused to go away. And just when we thought things were going to shift away, the world would bring over something else, and then men would speak right and walk left and do different contradictory things. And then, of course, the meeting in Abuja, the School of Ecology, where we were learning about how to monitor unfolding technologies, especially with regard to food issues and with climate engineering, was so deep. Your impact on the participants was greater. They were always asking that you should come back to Abuja. So I hope you put that on your diary and come back again to share knowledge. And I do remember coming to your home maybe 2-3 years ago in San Francisco. And, we went to the open market to buy things, the soaps, shea butter soap from Africa, used to make soap that sold on the streets of San Francisco. That was very memorable to me. And I developed a new love for such local products, especially from foreign markets. But I think the great thing is that in all that we've done together and the support we've got from Grassroots International, that's meant that grounded with the grassroots. And this is very significant. This is where to build, I believe, life-changing relationships. And I'm so glad that you all came to this meeting today. Thank you for having us.
Thank you so much. I just love how, you both centered this in, like you said, Giovanna, love is the center of what we do and the connection and relationships. So I want to ask you both a question that, we were talking about this before the webinar, and we were thinking about, what do we mean when we're talking about climate justice? So I put a link in the chat, and I'm also going to just screen share real briefly so that folks can take a look at this is a Mentimeter, just one of the ways we want to get your input. What comes to mind when you think of climate justice? So we'll come back and look at this after some time, but there's already some beautiful concepts coming up. rerooting in love, radical animism, racial justice. It's like definitely prominent. Indigenous self-determination. We'll come back and keep looking at this. But yeah, you know, when we were talking about this, Gopal and Nnimmo, we were thinking about how some people have a more narrow view of climate justice, but that actually it's incredibly diverse and complex ways of that it can be expressed. And wondering if you could both reflect on that in terms of your own experience and what climate justice has meant for your work.
Nnimmo, you go first.
You are so generous. Thanks for Sarah for sharing those, flashing those slides and very important words that came out. For me, climate justice is a matter of survival. It's about the fact that we should all do. I don't know if you're hearing me. Maybe I can take my video off.
Yeah, we hear you. I paused for a minute, but then you're back. You were. We might need to come back to you again.
Shall I chime in?
Sure, chime in.
Well,
Hopefully
yeah, Nnimmo knows that he can interrupt me at any time for any reason, and he'll be back. Yeah, I think I'll just start by saying we need to, decenter carbon in the conversation about climate and climate justice, because it's actually not about atmospheric concentrations of CO2. It's about relationships of power, and in fact, I'm fond of saying that to understand the climate crisis, it's insufficient to look up at the atmosphere and count carbon. You have to look down at the economy, the exploitation of land, labor, and living systems, and the erosion of seed and of soil and of story and of spirit. And this is not a rhetorical thing. Like the climate, the destabilization of Earth systems is actually not the problem, it's the emergent consequence of a whole different problem, which is screwing up communities and ecosystems everywhere on the planet at once. And it is when communities are in control of the decisions that affect their daily lives that the world is transformed, and so there isn't a solution to the climate crisis that doesn't involve addressing those problems. And what I would invite us to remember is that climate justice isn't this, like, I think the mainstream way it's getting talked about is as a win-win. Like we can win on addressing climate crisis, and we can win on jobs, or we can win on social justice, or we can win on this, or we can win on that. And it's not a win-win. It's the only way to win, because it is in the injustice that the crisis is created. And so that for me is like at the heart of what we mean when we say climate justice, and that part of what we are trying to recenter is how do we transform, it's only ever about relationships, and power is a dimension of every relationship. And if we do not design and structure and culture and cultivate the relationships of power we want, we will default to the relationships of power in the dominating society. That's why reimagining our relationships to each other and to all of the living world is at the heart of climate justice. And then I'll give it back to Nnimmo.
Thank you so much, Gopal. And apologies, I was kicked off by the internet, of course. Now, climate injustice has been a long way coming, perhaps way back to pre-colonial and the colonial period. The mode of production and consumption and relationships of groups of people, empires, sacrificial zones, and those who just must enjoy the pleasure of living well, of good living, in quotes. And so the the justice we campaign from, what I want to see is that those who have done the most harm must also take the most action to curtail the crisis. And right now, we find that the victims, or virtually a whole chunk of actions, climate action needed to make this planet livable, is being offloaded to the victims and to territories that have been despoiled and exploited for decades, if not for centuries. And so climate justice demands that we look at the entire relationship, socioeconomic, political, and look at all the structures that have been built that are driven by those who believe that they can benefit from the crisis, because people are looking at the opportunities being offered rather than looking at what should be done to tackle the problem. And over the years, we've come to the conclusion that the actions needed are actually very simple, but humans are so much hooked on complexities. And so rather than taking the simple actions, they're looking for more complex action, because that's how they build capital, that's how they build power, that's how they build discrimination and all the things we're talking about, and it's just simple. To me, climate action is so simple to deal with, and is keep it in the ground to start with. Keep it in the ground. You don't, we have a lot of technologies being developed about carbon capture and storage and all kinds of false solutions, all kinds of climate engineering or geo-engineering solutions being proposed. But why do you keep on pumping the carbon and then counting the molecules when you should leave the carbon where it belongs? So when I think of climate justice, I'm thinking of that end of the pipeline at the ground where the carbon is being extracted and where the people are being flooded, where they are facing droughts, where they are facing hunger, where they are facing all kinds of the negatives from the climate crisis. And not just the other pipeline, which says we can release the carbon and capture it and store it. What is happening where the resources are coming from? And it's the same thing, it goes across even to renewable energy. That we really need to look at the justice in that too, because mining is never an addition, it's always a subtraction. And this is very worrying and troubling.
Oof, yes. Yeah, Gopal.
Yeah, I just want to build on that for a second, because what you were just saying, Nnimmo, about about all the new technologies and including the clean energy technologies. One of the things that we have to remember is that there is the myth of infinite substitution, that we can just substitute one thing for another on an infinite basis, that we'll just replace dirty energy with clean energy. We'll just replace dirty cars with clean cars. We'll just replace, dirty jobs with clean jobs. Like that logic of infinite substitution is incompatible with both a finite planet and a commitment to just and transformed relationships. And so I would argue, like, one of the things that we need to ask ourselves when thinking about any of these things is, does it center reparations? Mm-hmm. And by reparations, I do not mean just simply amends for past harm. I mean, does it repair our relations such that that harm can never happen again? Mm-hmm. Reparations is only reparations if it actually changes the nature of the relationship such that the harm cannot happen in the future. It's not simply some kind of compensation for past harm. So that, again, getting to that idea of, like, the false solutions aren't just in the technologies, they're in the mind frame that tells us that we can infinitely substitute forever, or we can just change a thing here or there without changing the fundamental relationships.
That is such a clear and important point. And I was looking at the Mentimeter and seeing, like, reparations at the center of this right now. So yeah, really appreciate that point and the deeper meaning about what it means. And yeah, folks, feel free to, like, take a look at this and see some of the other concepts that you brought up that relate to climate justice. Life systems at center, health, agroecology, fully emancipated people, happiness, love, yes, liberated futures, right relationship. So think the next thing I wanted to ask you both about, Nnimmo, since you brought this up, like, yeah, how do you like bring forward all these false solutions at the same time that you like continue to extract the oil out? Can you talk about, you know, from your experience, and also, you know, Gopal, feel free to share, and I could add in from what we're hearing from other partners too, but like, what are some of the false solutions that you're coming up against? And can you, you know, say a few words about those? Well, surely like we can share resources with people, so don't feel like you have to get into all the details, but just so people get a sense of what you're up against. And also, you know, maybe then we can also, if you want to refer to like, what are overall priorities for the movements that you're working with right now? Would you like to start, Nnimmo? Are you frozen? Okay. Can I pass it to you, Gopal?
Yeah, sure. I can start. I think one of the big ones that, and Nnimmo named this, so I'll just briefly touch on it, is the carbon capture and sequestration and direct air capture and all of these sort of like ways of extending the life of fossil fuels, which is about extending the life of the fossil fuel industry, which is about extending the life of finance capital, and we have to remember that like the extractivism is entirely dependent on imperialism. If you extract faster than the capacity of a living system to regenerate, you need endless new frontiers of extractivism, and that requires militarism, and that requires war, and that requires empire. So so I think anything that is attempting to extend the life of fossil fuels is a serious, obviously fundamental problem. So, and I think there's this sort of like politics of desperation that we need to be very careful about. And it's this idea that like anything is better than nothing. And anything is better than nothing will lead to nothing or worse. So I think we should just remember that. And then what I would like to lift up in terms of things that I'm particularly concerned about is, well, I think there's a huge, like sort of, we're not paying nearly enough attention to biotech and biotech consolidations in agriculture. And we tend to think of it, we tend to not see, they have the biotech industry has some really, really smart strategies for keeping us unaware of what's really happening. So for example, you might have heard of gene drives, this idea of creating genetic modifications that will propagate through an entire wild population and force a genetic an engineered trait onto an entire wild population of an organism. And if you look up gene drives, you'll hear about the eradication of mosquitoes for malaria. That's the charismatic application that they want. They want to suggest that, you know, we can cure malaria, the #1 killer in Africa, by gene driving mosquitoes, basically through femicide, forcing the entire population to be male and eliminating and then driving Adelphis aegypti into extinction. But that's not the point. The point is, if you actually dig into gene drives, all of the patents are in agriculture. They're all about corporate concentration of agriculture, of seed to make very specific plants that track with very particular pesticides and herbicides. It is about corporate concentration in agriculture, which is the threat to the right answer, which was the pre-existing condition, which was food sovereignty and agroecology. Remember, food sovereignty is not the alternative to industrial agriculture. It is the pre-existing condition that industrial agriculture must wage war against in order to simply exist. So I would, look to those kinds of things. And then I'll stop in a second, Sara, and let you chime in also, and hopefully we'll get Nnimmo back. But I just want to invite us to not ask the question, does this Does it work at reducing carbon? Does it work at addressing climate change? I actually don't care. I don't actually care if it reduces CO2 or if it, because that's not the measure of a solution. The questions we should be asking ourselves is, what relationships of power is it built on? What relationships of power does it depend on? What relationships of power does it lock in? And those are the important questions. Because you might have something that actually technically does work. And if we're arguing, if the only argument we're making is, does direct air capture work? We're conceding what the real problem is here, which is it takes huge concentrations of wealth and power to bring these technologies into being, and therefore lock in for generations extractive relationships. And that's the problem. I don't actually care whether it reduces CO2 in the atmosphere, quite frankly. What I care is what are the relationships of power that bring it into being, and that it will lock in and extend over what period of time. And so for us, it's about, that's the measure of solutions.
Thanks so much, Gopal.
I was just trying to fill the space, Nnimmo, until you got back and
Yeah,
dropped your pearls.
You might have a
there's
sense of
sabotage
what
against my participation. Might be shell at work.
Yeah, you might guess what we were talking about, where I was asking, what are some of the false solutions that you're coming up against, and what are some of the priorities that the movement that you're connected to have? So yeah, would you like to respond to that? And thank you so much for continuing to come back in.
Absolutely. While I have a minute online, let me just quickly say I agree with what Gopal said. And I think the big problem is that those who are benefiting from the crisis, those who are benefiting from the petroleum-fed civilization, don't ever want that civilization to come to a close. But obviously, that civilization cannot last forever, driving the world to the brink. So a lot of the manufacturing terminologies and concepts like nature-based solution. When you hear nature-based solution, you begin to think that this is beautiful. Oh, this honors nature. This takes care of what is going around us. But it's just a terminology to hide all the false solutions, like reducing emission from deforestation and forest degradation, REDD, that everybody wants to stop deforestation. But when you look at a forest and say this is a carbon stock, it's not a collection of, it's not a living ecosystem of multiple species, but just a place for carbon. That leads to displacement of communities, it leads to destruction of livelihoods, it leads to destruction of spirituality and even culture. And we see that as a false solution. The carbon market itself, the whole concept that one can pollute and buy carbon credit to pollute, buys credit allowance to keep on doing what is is not right because the carbon is absorbed somewhere else. That clearly is a very false way to think about the balance of what is going on. This has also encouraged what is called carbon farming, where farms are created just for carbon stock, not for food, but you're growing things to absorb carbon. Is clearly a very false solution. And then when the terminology, climate smart agriculture, when governments in the global south hear that, they actually clap and they're happy. We want technology to give us climate smart agriculture. But the real climate smart agriculture are the ones grown, that the farms grown with indigenous seeds that have been preserved over the years by indigenous farmers, not the one developed in the laboratory that cannot withstand the complex kind of challenges we're having in our time. And so those kind of seeds that are sold as climate smart seeds are seeds that the farmers have to buy every year from the market shelf, not the ones you share, not the ones the farmers develop on their farms, but the ones that have to be bought every time. And that clearly is not climate smart, but climate dumb, climate stupid agriculture, if you permit me to use that terminology. But this is what is led to kind of the carbon trade, having carbon market forest as carbon stock have led to the colonization of vast territories and more threats, land grabbing across Africa and in some other places, and all for the sake of sequestering carbon in trees and in soils. And the threats continue. And these are all false and they will not solve the problem.
Oh, absolutely. This conversation is like such fire. I'm so grateful to both of you for sharing this. And yeah, you know, we've been hearing similar things from other partners that we're working with, from, you know, folks who are fighting against the red that you were talking about, Nnimmo, that's been not only like commodifying forests, but also dividing Indigenous peoples against each other, and creating, you know, really dangerous situations for leaders who are standing up to that, from, you know, the Amazon to Central America and you know, Africa, Indonesia, and beyond. To what you've said about climate smart agriculture, and just, yeah, seeing how like that corporate concentration and agriculture is such a huge threat, and really lifting up what you said, like the people who are preserving the seeds, who are preserving Indigenous lifeways around how to grow food, how to protect waterways, how to be in right relationship with our territories, et cetera, like that is actually working, that people who are defending their territories against extraction, like Gopal, your point around like, okay, I don't really care if the false solutions, you know, are meeting some metrics around carbon, which up to now, to be clear, they're not. So just to be clear, they're clearly
they don't
not.
work, actually, as it turns out. But
right,
even
but
if they
that's not their
did,
point. If you put all the resources that are going into those into supporting the real solutions that are from the grassroots communities that we know work, that have been working, that are not only dealing with the climate crisis, but also racial justice, economic justice, gender justice, all the other things, you know, imagine how much further we would be. And so, yeah, really appreciate you linking that. And yeah, I was going to put another link in the chat to ask if folks could share feedback to a question, because, you know, we want to really center this as like, as Grassroots International, as people who've been supporting Grassroots International, as other funders, like what's our role in supporting climate justice movements at this time? So folks, please like go to that link and add. You can say more than a couple words, like it could be a little bit more of a reflection. And then I also want to invite folks to either come off mute or put your name in the chat to, you know, if you have either a question or reflection on this conversation that you would like to bring up verbally. We want to invite some more comments and feedback from all the participants too. So maybe Emily, Rose, or Sasha, could we zoom back out to like the full view so that we can all see each other? And maybe as we do that, I think on my screen I'm still seeing one. There we go. Yeah, would just open up again and say, like, I guess from Grassroots' perspective on this question of like the role of funders, you know, clearly we have like political analysis and values, and we are like really excited, honored, privileged to be able to be in partnership and relationship with movements on the front lines of these struggles. And we also see the importance of like, once we know who are the movements that are at the forefront of these struggles, really listening to and following their leadership, and then bringing this message to other, you know, whether it's like individual, you know, people we know in our families or communities or networks who care about these issues, to like other foundations, to other funder spaces, as one of the things that we're grateful to be able to do with many of you and would like to do more of. And yeah, Gopal and Nnimmo, if you have some feedback you want to share on what you would like to see in terms of the role of funders around supporting climate justice movements, we would welcome that. And yeah, please, for other folks, put your name in the chat if you're like, you have a comment you'd like to share or a question.
Is it okay? Can I add something really quick while you're doing that? Just on your quick, you know, just a very quick story. In 2014, for the People's Climate March, you know, the Climate Justice Alliance and grassroots groups and a whole bunch of folks who were organizing the massive People's Climate March in New York. And there was a group of folks who were going to march on the People's Climate March. They were I think it was called the Green Zionist Alliance or something like that. I can't remember exactly what their name was, but there was this big debate within the climate justice movement about how we were going to respond to that. And some folks felt like we shouldn't make it a thing because that'll be a quote unquote distraction. And I would like to invite us to remember that climate justice isn't about, you know, this is how we have to rethink our orientation, right? Like that's when, you know, we started saying the path to climate justice travels through a free Palestine. Like it is an indication of how far away we are from climate justice that we allow an ongoing ecological warfare, whether it's invasive pine plantations or the destruction of olive orchards. Like that is about extractive relationships of power. And we have to view climate justice as an opportunity to articulate the systemic nature of our struggles and the interrelationships of our struggles. So in some ways, I kind of want to say, like, I don't actually care so much whether people call their thing climate justice. I'm looking for, you know, like you can be part of the food sovereignty movement. You can be part of the transformative justice movement, the prison abolition movement. All of that is the work, right? Like we are not going to bring the salmon home in a world of policing, prisons, punishment, and, you know, putting humans in cages. It's the same system that puts humans in cages that puts dams on our rivers. So those two things have to be seen as in relationship to each other. And that's my invitation to anybody who is inspired by climate justice, is to think beyond the way climate is framed for us as an opportunity to see the interconnectedness of everything. Shut up.
Yes, I think you know how much like you're rooting this and that experience of standing up against Zionism means to folks at Grassroots International and our partners. So and all the other things, dams, yes. Like Nnimmo, you want to chime in?
Sure. Well, when I just to respond to the question that you put in the chat box or that you showed a moment ago, I think the focus should be to support grassroots struggles for dignity, for respect of their territories, respect of their right to life, because this is what it boils down to, the right to relate with nature in a way that is actually sustainable and the way that supports the local economy. In Niger Delta, we have a coalition on the socio-ecological transformation. Such supports, you know, really help. Supporting such struggles really help for people to work on what really matters to them. And I think this is very important, to support groups standing against the mindless extractivism, whether it's extractivism in terms of minerals or forest resources, and just also supporting struggles to recover memory. I think this is very, very important. Recovery of memory is extremely important in terms of being able to fight against a repeat of the kind of history that nobody wants to be repeated. And then, of course, there are so many struggles for mitigation and adaptation, simply because that is the way to see real means of survival. Like women, for example, restoring mangrove, lost lands, holding the ocean from taking over their lands, all those kind of practical supports. And the political aspect of just supporting the changing of narratives. I think that's the creative ways of sharing knowledge and wisdom. I think that's very important. Challenging the imaginaries.
So important and helpful. Thank you so much, Nnimmo. And just sharing, thank you everybody who's been sharing some responses to this question too, about the role of funders in this. So yes, no new colonization, absolutely. I invite funders to not think about what solutions I support, but to ask whose leadership will I follow and support. And that's something that we're, yes, fortunate to have some really clear answers on. Organize funders, ask the right questions. Yes, long-term support. So I know there's more that we can continue to talk about on this And we're like really excited for this to be, you know, not the beginning or end of this conversation, but part of like an ongoing conversation. So I think I am passing it back to Sasha, and you'll take us from there.
Yeah, thank you all so much. And I was actually going to invite us not to jump into an immediate conversation, but in the process of thinking about shifting our way of being in the world, just to take a moment to sit, you know, with what we've heard in silence for a few moments, and just like let us absorb it and kind of reflect, either, you know, in our bodies, in our minds, in our spirits, about what kind of transformation it has brought, this new understanding that has been shared with us, and how it may have shifted our own understanding. So let's just take a moment to do that, to be together kind of in a space reflecting quietly on what we have learned. You can keep your videos on or off as you feel most comfortable. And very slowly, as you start to feel ready, you could turn your videos back on if you like, or keep them off. Yeah. And, you know, if we think about it, that was just really like a minute, you know, and just sort of thinking about like, what are the moments that we could pause and create that kind of more reflectiveness about these solutions, and to really let things that are altering settle and take root in us, so that we can begin to, you know, build this kind of new world of different relationships that folks have been inviting us to co-create. So what I was going to suggest now, as we take a few moments, you know, folks have already begun doing really beautiful work in the chat of like sharing things as you're hearing them that really spoke to you. And I wanted to invite people to come off mute and either like share what you have written in the chat, or something that you jotted down, or something that's in your mind that you wanted to like share back to the group, you know, so that we could begin to develop like a collective shift in understanding around this. And I can start very briefly. I mean, I wrote down quite a lot of things. But one idea that was really new to me was to support the struggles to recover memory. You know, it's an essential component of the struggle for climate justice. The connection between memory and ecology and ecological justice was really profound. From Nnimmo, and then from Gopal, the question of, does it center reparations, not just amends for past harm, but does it repair our relations so the harm can never happen again? Those two bits of wisdom together for me really stood out as a beginning of an illumination of a path forward. So yeah, if anybody else had something like that you wanted to share with the group, feel free to come off mute one by one, or raise your hand if you feel more comfortable that way, and then we could just begin to have this knowledge land in a different way. Yeah, go ahead, Ayman.
Thank you, Gopal. Thank you, Nnimmo. Thank you, everyone. Yeah, I was listening to you, Gopal, today, and Nnimmo, such fire, like blood boiling speakers. I appreciate that. I was thinking about the settler colonial project in Palestine, how you can do even climate change, especially when there are a lot of settlements, there are a lot of colonies, there are a lot of settlers coming from Europe and other areas to take the land, to kick people out, especially in Jerusalem right now, the ethnic cleansing, and in Palestine, in Gaza, like a slow motion genocide happening as of now. So I'm still wondering, how can we, as Palestinians, how can we bring the climate real solution actually to ground? And you have no control. You have literally no control on fences. I don't call them borders because Zionism doesn't believe in borders. How can we do this? That we have to prioritize liberation and then talk about climate justice, or vice versa. I'm still struggling with that, like personally, from a critical mindset. It's not from like what people do, so yeah, thank you.
I don't know if the speakers want to respond to that, but I wanted to just share that I also thought the statement about the path to climate justice travels through Free Palestine was such a like a clearer articulation than when most people talk about what intersectionality really means and what root causes really mean. So I really wanted to appreciate that, and it's something that we can apply to other frontline neglected places and issues. The path to climate justice travels through Black farms. The path to climate justice travels through trans communities, like all the things that people are working on right now, where they have no choice but to radically redefine the relationships because the knee is on their neck. Like you cannot, you can't work on climate justice while someone has their entire has their knee on your neck or can't breathe. So I think because sometimes just saying what you said, Gopal, or saying that we don't care about carbons is something that is like so hard to say out there in the world when you're trying to recruit more people into this movement support work. So I wonder if there's something that we can do around how we talk about this that lifts up, just kind of using that sentence structure. And Nnimmo, I know you've talked a lot about climate justice as like the one and the same of like decolonizing, work. So how do we like take these concepts that in most people's minds in privileged countries are two separate things that they do, and like they're optional, they're not coupled. So it just made me think a lot about like how to talk about that in a more like a organic, like connected way that people can't decouple. So thank you for that.
And Trina, I see your hand is raised. Did you want to add?
Yeah, I did. Thank you. Thank you so much. I just wanted to share that I was reading another one of Nnimmo's poems, which I find very moving. And this one is called A Return to Being. And the last four lines really are really moving to me. And I won't read them, but what I will say is that the title, A Return to Being, really makes me think about home, right? I think, Gopal, we've talked about like eco means home. And so when we're returning to a being, I feel like we're looking for we're looking for home again. It is a spiritual journey. It's a political journey. It's an ancestral journey. But it just reminds me that these struggles that climate justice runs through really is about us returning home again. And that just really resonates with me on a really deep emotional level. And I just really appreciate that. And I just believe that poetry and art, and we've talked about this before, helps us to articulate those really tender desires and visions that is hard to articulate, you know, in a movement. It may be hard to shout in the street, but we feel it. Yeah, so I just wanted to share that I was making all of those connections and just appreciate your poetry, Nnimmo. It's really moving.
Thank you. I'm hiding behind the sunbed.
Even that's poetry, Nnimmo.
Oh, well. Sometimes poetry is the best way to express our emotions. And really is very, very interesting. In our work, we're aiming at healing individuals and healing territories and communities, and poetry and song are very, very important tools for that. But thank you for appreciating. I appreciate that.
Beautiful. Well, I wish this conversation could go on, but today can be just the beginning. I mean, the work has been going on, and this relationship building has been going on for a long time, and many of us know each other from different spaces and have had these conversations in different spaces, but this kind of grouping of folks can continue to convene at these encounters and in other spaces and keep moving our collective learning forward. So just wanted to share so much gratitude for everyone for being here together in this space. It was a mix of staff and board and funders and donors and friends, and a real beautiful grouping of folks from our community. So it was really, really an honor to share space with you all, and especially Sara and Gopal and Nnimmo for your thought leadership and your praxis leadership on this work. What I'm thinking to do is, we have just 1 minute left. There's lots of opportunities to continue to be involved in this work, and maybe we can circulate them via email after this meeting, along with a link to the recording and some highlights from the conversation, if that feels good to everyone. And we did have a short evaluation form that we were hoping that folks could fill out just to give us feedback, since this is the beginning of our series for this year. We want to keep improving it throughout the year and building in feedback and ideas from folks as you come. So we can put the link to that in the chat, and if people could fill it out, Emily Rose has a little bit of music for us to listen to as we fill it out. And then I just wanted to offer, if in case Sara or Gopal or Nnimmo, if you had any closing words as we're filling out the survey and beginning to close the space.
Huge appreciations again, really to all of you for engaging, and Sasha for organizing, and Gopal and Nnimmo especially for not just your wisdom that you shared, your time today, but really, your lifelong commitment to these struggles, to these visions, to this, the possibility and the beauty of what people are creating from a place of love and centering life. I think wanted to just let folks know, the other sessions in this series are definitely connected. The next one next month, that Giovanna will be speaking along with one of our partners from Oaxaca on food sovereignty and agroecology from an Indigenous perspective. As we talked about how that's part of the climate justice, or that is like the people solutions. The next one in July on grassroots feminisms, like you can't have climate justice without grassroots feminisms, and October on healing justice and Black Palestinian solidarity. Like all of this is connected, and so just really excited for the continued conversations and for just all the ways that we're continuing to walk together inside and outside of those spaces. So thank you.
I'll just say thank you so much for having us, and it's just a real gift to be in the conversation community.
Cool.
Thank you. Thank you.
And also just everyone, these mute buttons are, useful in moments and less useful in moments. So feel free also to take yourself off of mute if you want to share love or gratitude or well wishes to everyone. Like that would be super welcome. So feel free to do that.
I'd like to just say, Gopal, I did an internship with Project Underground back in 1999 when over out in Berkeley when I was a college student. So did a poster on the UA of Colombia and their resistance to the oil extraction there. So just appreciating, how interconnected we all are. And one of the points that I'd like to make just in listening to all of this is how much more responsibility we do have as people who living in the North, people living in the United States, with the privileges that we have. I was just eating a bag of peanuts yesterday, and I've been eating it for days. And I finally read the back, and the whole back is a story of how this company was the first company to offset all of its carbon by planting new forests somewhere where they don't even say, and how proud they are to be, offsetting 100% of their carbon, endorsed by whoever there is endorsing these things and makes them look really, really good. And until I really took some training on fall solutions, I took training, the carbon pricing training with Tamara Gilbertson, and then with Gopal, we had a great session for our staff at Grassroots International to understand greater, and just it's such an important issue, and it's not always about what you do. Sometimes it's about what you don't do that needs to be done, right? So not necessarily making a solution more complicated than it needs to be. Sometimes maybe that's part of the mentality too of imperialism and colonialism, is to make us think we have to techno fix and complicate our way out of these things. So keep it in the ground.
Here, here.
Yeah. Okay, let's come off mute and say goodbye and thank you. And